Welcome back to Advanced Analytical English C1 C2, the series where we break down complex, real-world communication to help you speak with precision, nuance, and professional confidence. I'm Laura.
And I'm Thomas. Today we are exploring a scenario that virtually everyone encounters, yet very few people navigate with genuine linguistic sophistication: returning or exchanging clothes at a shop.
At first glance, returning an item might seem like a purely transactional administrative interaction. You have a receipt, you have a piece of clothing, and you want your money back or a different size. But if we look closer, returning or exchanging an item is actually a masterclass in consumer diplomacy. It requires a delicate balance between assertiveness and tact, especially when policies are strict, receipts are missing, or the product itself is flawed.
Precisely, Laura. The underlying tension in these exchanges stems from a fundamental asymmetry. As a customer, you are seeking flexibility, while the retail associate is bound by store policy, corporate compliance, and inventory constraints. The difficulty lies in asserting your rights or making a request without escalating the situation into unnecessary friction or confrontation.
That raises a broader question about how we communicate intent in customer service environments. Are we simply enforcing a contract, or are we negotiating a mutually agreeable outcome? There is a subtle distinction here between standing your ground and engaging in collaborative problem-solving.
To put that into perspective, let's consider the conventional wisdom around customer service. Many consumers operate under the assumption that the customer is always right, expecting immediate compliance from retail staff. However, retail systems are increasingly automated and governed by rigid return windows, digital tracking, and strict condition assessments. Assuming that polite insistence will automatically override a system policy is often a flawed premise.
That is a fair point, Thomas. On closer examination, the argument for a rigid, policy-first approach from the retailer's side also has its limitations. Retailers know that customer lifetime value often hinges on how gracefully exceptions are handled. So, while staff are trained to follow protocol, they almost always retain a degree of discretionary authority, or at least the ability to escalate a request to a manager who does.
Which brings us to an important distinction that often gets overlooked in these interactions: the difference between policy enforcement and managerial discretion. Policy enforcement is strict, automated, and binary. Managerial discretion, on the other hand, relies on goodwill, context, and the customer's ability to frame their situation reasonably.
Exactly. For example, consider a realistic scenario where a customer, let's call her Sarah, purchases a tailored blazer for an upcoming conference. A week later, she notices that the lining near the seam has unraveled not through wear and tear, but due to a subtle manufacturing defect. However, Sarah has misplaced her physical paper receipt, though she has a digital bank statement showing the transaction.
In Sarah's situation, if she approaches the counter demanding a full refund while insisting that paper receipts are obsolete, she immediately places the store associate on the defensive. The associate is forced into policy enforcement mode. But if Sarah frames the issue around product integrity and politely asks if the purchase can be verified through her digital record, she opens the door for discretionary assistance.
That scenario highlights several advanced expressions we often use when navigating high-stakes or sensitive requests. Notice how we talked about managerial discretion and framing a request. Let's break down some of the key language that elevates your communication in these settings.
A particularly useful phrase we used earlier is to exercise discretion. In a professional or customer service context, exercising discretion means using one's own judgment rather than strictly following a rigid rule. For instance, you might say, "I understand the standard return window has passed, but I was hoping you might exercise some discretion given the circumstances."
Another indispensable collocation is a subtle defect or an underlying fault. When returning an item that isn't working or fitting properly, distinguishing between general dissatisfaction and a genuine quality issue is critical. Saying, "There appears to be a structural flaw in the stitching," sounds far more objective and persuasive than simply saying, "This jacket is broken."
We should also highlight the concept of hedging, or using diplomatic language to qualify a request. Instead of stating, "You gave me the wrong size," a more polished approach would be, "It appears there may have been a slight mix-up with the sizing on the tag." This avoids placing direct blame while clearly identifying the issue.
Exploring the deeper implications of these interactions, we see that retail returns touch on broader ethical and logistical questions. With the rise of fast fashion and e-commerce, returns have massive environmental and financial costs. Retailers are torn between offering frictionless customer experiences and preventing return fraud or excessive processing costs.
Indeed, when a customer understands these operational trade-offs, their approach naturally shifts. They realize that retail workers are managing complex inventory protocols, which makes diplomatic, precise communication even more effective.
Now, let's move into our advanced speaking practice. We'll present 6 scenario prompts designed to help you practice hedging, diplomatic framing, and persuasive justification. After each prompt, we'll provide a model C1, C2 response.
Here is prompt 1. Imagine you are returning an unworn item 2 days past the 30-day return policy due to travel delays. How do you politely request an exception?
A model response would be, I completely understand that your policy specifies a 30-day limit, but due to unavoidable travel delays, I was unable to return sooner. Given that the item is entirely unworn with tags attached, would it be possible to issue a store credit as an exception?
Prompt 2. You bought a garment that shrunk significantly after following the care label instructions exactly. How do you explain this without sounding overly aggressive?
You could say, I followed the care instructions explicitly, yet the garment experienced significant shrinkage after a single wash. Given that this appears to be a material quality issue rather than improper care, I'd appreciate it if we could arrange an exchange or refund.
Prompt 3. You do not have the physical paper receipt, but you have proof of purchase on your mobile banking app. How do you request a lookup?
A strong C1 response is, regrettably, I'm unable to locate the physical receipt. However, I have the exact transaction record on my banking app showing the date and amount. Would you be able to verify the purchase in your system using those details?
Prompt 4. The store associate offers only a partial credit, but you believe you are entitled to a full exchange due to a manufacturing fault. How do you counter diplomatically?
You might say, I appreciate the offer of partial credit, but given that the damage is clearly an underlying manufacturing defect rather than standard wear and tear, I believe a full exchange would be the most equitable resolution.
Prompt 5. You want to exchange an item gifted to you, but you do not want the gift giver to be notified or involved. How do you inquire?
Consider this response. I received this as a gift and would love to exchange it for a different size. Is it possible to process a discrete gift exchange directly for store credit without altering the original purchaser's account details?
Prompt 6. The associate states they cannot help you, and you need to speak to a manager without causing a scene. How do you make that request?
A refined approach is, I completely respect that this falls outside your standard authority. Would you mind putting me in touch with a store manager who might have the discretion to review the situation?
Excellent models, Laura. Now, let's consider how to apply these linguistic tools across practical contexts, whether in professional negotiation, client management, or everyday dispute resolution.
The principles we've discussed, acknowledging constraints, framing issues around objective facts, and appealing to reasonable discretion, transcend retail shops. In a corporate environment, if a client requests a project modification past a deadline using phrasing like, while our standard schedule is fixed, we may be able to exercise some flexibility, depending on scope, establishes authority while remaining cooperative.
Similarly, in academic or administrative settings, diplomatic qualification prevents unnecessary confrontation, using structures like it would be misleading to assume, or there is an important caveat to consider, allows you to challenge positions constructively while maintaining professional rapport.
To synthesize our discussion today, effective communication during exchanges or disputes is never about confrontation. It's about strategic clarity. We've seen that distinguishing between rigid policy and managerial discretion allows consumers to position their requests persuasively.
We've also emphasized that precision in language, whether identifying a subtle structural flaw or hedging a diplomatic counter-argument, yields far better outcomes than emotional insistence. Mastering these nuances is what elevates spoken English from merely fluent to truly persuasive and articulate.
That brings us to our final reflective question for today's episode. In your own professional or personal interactions, when was the last time you successfully reframed a rigid boundary into a collaborative negotiation through precise language?
A question well worth pondering as you practice applying these expressions in your daily communication.
Thank you for joining us on Advanced Analytical English C1, C2. Keep refining your precision, stay intellectually curious, and continue testing the boundaries of your language practice.
Until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.